Oh,
Well, that
wow.
was weird. It told me it was recording.
Yeah, that is
Told me I
weird,
could
huh?
leave the meeting if I wanted because it was recording.
There's probably like some lawsuit or something.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, let's pray real quick. Lord, I don't know where we're going with this whole thing tonight. We pray that you steer the ship and there be some understanding, some clarity of, where we're going and what you want us to understand. So I'll leave it into your hands, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Last time we did Daniel 8, and so I started within the last week or so looking at 9, and then got to a point and I realized that there's things we missed in 8 that I think are probably dependent on understanding, or at least recognizing before we go to 9.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do is to start off with by reviewing what we had known or done last time in Daniel 8. So if you guys want to turn to that, we're not going to read the whole thing, but there's a couple interesting things that are here that I think show up again in the next chapter, maybe even 10 and 11, chapter 10, 11 too. And if we skip over them, then we kind of lose what it may be saying or what else it may be saying.
Okay.
So if you remember, like Daniel had a vision in 8:1. If you guys want to just look at 8, somebody read 8:1 and 2.
In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulai Canal.
So in verse 1, Daniel describes how he's having a vision. So what we want to notice here is the word vision that's used is a Hebrew word, and the word is chazon or calzone or something like that. And it's going to be significant because what we're going to see is that in this chapter, instead of having one vision, he seems to have multiple visions that we missed last time because we thought he only had one. So here in verse 1, and I'll show you guys just with my King James Plus thing. So I'm just going to share the screen so you guys can see it. Here we go. So you can see this, right?
Yes.
You want me to zoom in a little bit, or is it seeable?
No, that's good.
So we see in verse 1, 8:1, we see this word right here, vision.
Mhm.
And if we click on it, it's called it's a chalzone, or might even be call zone, might be easier way to understand it. It's a word vision. And he says it here in verse 1, this chalzone. And he also says it in verse 2. He said, and I saw in a vision, the call zone. And then he goes on and he talks about the vision, and we'll just kind of go relatively quickly through this. So we see it once in verse 1, and the word call zone, which is the word vision, in verse 2. It says it twice. He sees 2 rams that push west, south, and north. And anybody remember what the ram represented?
One of the, I forget. I don't remember.
It was the Medes and the Persians.
Medes and the Persians. Okay. But they talk about the Medes and the Persians later too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we remember that it had 2 horns, and one of the horns was a little higher or more substantial than the other. And we said, well, I forgot, what did we say? Those were the Persians that were a little bit bigger. Is that what it was?
We said one of them, I thought it was, but it probably was the Persians because I always get that wrong.
So in the midst of this vision that he's having, continuing on, a he-goat with one horn appears and smashes into this ram, casting him to the ground and trampling.
Right.
And we said the he-goat represented who?
Greece.
Right. And the one horn, or the he-goat that has the single horn on it, what was, or who do we think the horn was?
I don't remember.
It would be the leader of Greece, and it would be Alexander the Great.
Oh, Alexander the Great, right?
Oh, yeah, I had that noted.
Cool.
Yeah, me too. Oops.
I couldn't find, I noted my side on the left and yours on the right because mine was wrong, I think.
So Alexander the Great, the leader of Greece, defeats the ram, who are or the Medes and Persians, and that does follow history.
Yeah.
So then the he-goat, or Greece, the horn is broken off while he was still strong, and that signified Alexander's young death at, I think, age 32 or 3 or something like that. And then it says 4 horns came up in its place, and we guessed from history that the Grecian kingdom and the conquered land and so forth was split among 4 generals. Okay, and in verse 9, if somebody wants to read verse 9, because what we find is another horn seems to come up in verse 9 out of what we think to be the 4 horns that were the previous generals of Greece's, of Alexander the Great's, Grecian kingdom or what have you. So somebody read 9.
Go ahead, Max.
Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land.
Now we had read that, and as I was reading this week and discovering, and there's stuff in 8 that maybe we either maybe we're close to what it might mean, or maybe we missed. One of the things was in this verse 9, it says, and out of one of them came forth the little horn. And there's a disagreement as to whether this little horn came out of the 4 winds of heaven in the previous verse, or whether it comes up from one of the 4 horns.
Okay.
Okay, I know there's, if we looked at this, we'd find that there's not a right or wrong. It's coming up from one of the 2. Now, if we say it's coming up from one of the 4 horns, we talked about last week, it probably being that guy Antiochus Epiphanes, who was one of the generals from one of those 4 previous kingdoms, who, like 100 and some odd years later, when he became king, he desecrated the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay.
So we thought, or surmised, that this little horn that it's referring to would represent what nationality?
Whatever that guy is.
Yeah,
Is it
whatever.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
No, I wrote Jerusalem, but I don't know. Maybe I just meant grew. He destroyed. I don't know why I wrote Jerusalem.
Well, it would be Greece. Was it the he-goat
Yeah.
that had the one horn? That was Alexander the Great, and then that
Romans.
well, hold on.
Okay.
Follow me here. The single horn goat that beat up the ram. Then this single horn of the goat broke off, and we surmised that was Alexander the Great's kingdom.
Because he was young and died.
Yeah, and then 4 of horns came up on the he-goat again. What nationality is that again?
Greece.
Right. So in verse 9, we thought if this little horn that comes up from the 4 horns, he'd also have to be in some way Greece too, right?
Yeah.
Unless the point that it's making was in verse 9, that a little horn came up out of the four winds of heaven. Okay. Which I don't think anyone knows. I think there's a school of thought that says, well, he's got to be Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek guy that went in and devastated the temple. But if you're saying the little horn that came up could be out of the four winds of heaven, then it ushers in the kingdom that you just mentioned, Dee, which is
Rome.
Rome. Now, remember the statue, you had Babylon, the Medes and Persians, Greece, and then the legs were Rome. So it could be that hidden in verse 9 and this little horn is a reference not to Greece and Antiochus Epiphanes, who did naturally go in and devastate the temple. It could be out of the four winds of heaven, and it could represent Rome. Okay, so let's continue on. So it does, you could make a case to say, well, there's that last kingdom, because we
Okay.
thought last week we only saw up to Greece. This week we're saying, hey, maybe Rome's there too, and we're not
Yeah.
recognizing it.
I'm sorry, wait, I'm sorry, I'm talking. So in one aspect, it's like looking at the Medes, Persians, and the Greece overtaking. And then on the other, what are the four winds of heaven again?
The four winds of heaven, I think they're a reference to like the Holy Spirit over time, who, has his, what he wants done, and out of the four winds of heaven that God controls comes up a little horn. And if that's the case, and if it's the horn isn't like a fifth horn on the
Yeah.
he-goat, it could be a reference to Rome. But
Okay,
it's very hard to know whether that's the reference. But we're going to look at, we're going to keep going here. So it would either be those two kingdoms. Let me let Don in real quick.
like those two kingdoms, meaning Greece.
Don.
Hi, Don.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late.
That's okay. So we're looking, as I began to do 9, I'm sorry. I realized there's things in 8 I think we missed, and I wanted to kind of quickly go through. And right now we're like in verse 9 of chapter 8. We're not doing it all as a whole, but we are in essence kind of going through and picking out the things that we think we may have missed. In particular, in verse 9, we were talking about a little horn that came up from, if you remember last week,
Yeah,
what we thought to be the four horns of
Right.
Greece. But if you looked at verse 9 a little closer, you wonder if the little horn came up out of the previous four horns or whether it came out of the four winds of heaven. Because you could look at it either way. And if it's the little horn coming out of the previous four horns, it would be somebody in that Greek family line. And we thought it was Antiochus Epiphanes, remember, who went in and physically devastated the temple. But we also say, well, if this little horn in verse 9 isn't coming up out of the previous four horns, but is coming up out of the four winds of heaven, it could be a reference to the coming on of the very last kingdom that we didn't talk about last week, which would have been the legs of iron, which would have been Rome.
okay,
It could be, okay?
okay.
So that's where we are in verse 9. Now, that from one of the four horns comes up a little horn, or one of the four great winds comes up the little horn, and from one of the four Grecian divided kingdoms, a leader arises toward the south and east, or a leader comes out of the land of Rome, or Rome rises up, one of the two. Last week, we thought it was Antiochus Epiphanes, but we get to verse 14. Somebody wants to read verse 14 real quick.
He said to me, it will take 2,300 mornings, then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated.
Okay, so at this point in verse 14, and D, read 15 too.
While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man.
Okay, so here we see the end of the first vision. There's a mine that says, and it came to pass when I, Daniel, had seen the vision. Again, Don, we talked about the word vision that's used in verse 1 and 2 when Daniel begins to describe what he's seeing in those first two verses. And also in verse 15, and the word is a Hebrew word called chazon or kalzon or something along those lines. So here he's saying, in 15, he's saying, and it came to pass, and I, Daniel, had seen the vision or the kalzon, okay, that I sought to understand it. So the vision, according to Daniel, is over at that point in 15. And behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. All right, in the end of 15. So somebody wants to read 16 too.
And I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision.
Okay, this is where things change. Okay, this is one of those weird scriptures. So he
Yeah.
saw the kalzon. He sought to understand it, and suddenly a man's voice that is, I have in my Bible, standing between the banks of the Ulai or the river. So if he's standing between the banks, what's he on?
The water,
Right. Who stands on water?
Jesus.
Right. He says to Gabriel, Gabriel, make this man to understand and the word there isn't kalzon, it's a word called Mara. Okay, which is weird because Daniel's saying, I want to know the meaning of this kalzon, and Gabriel is saying, no, Jesus says to Gabriel, help me or let this man know the understanding to the Mara.
What's Mara mean?
Mara's, or I'll show you guys real quick. And by the way, I didn't come up with this stuff. I just was listening and reading a whole bunch of different takes on this. Here's the verse. You guys can see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the word vision right here. And if I just put my mouse on it, it should show the meaning. Of course, there it is. You see it?
Yeah.
Mara.
Yeah.
Appearance, a shape, a vision, beautiful, a pattern, a sight, a visage, et cetera, but it's translated in vision. Now, oddly enough, in verse 15, it says, look up in the previous verse, it says, and we'll read it again, and it came to pass when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision, and this is the word kalzon, if you can see it, okay? And there stood before me as the appearance, and that word appearance is Mara. So in verse 16, Mara is translated as vision, but in 15, it's translated as appearance.
Weird.
So Daniel's trying to figure out in 15 what the meaning was of the kalzon vision that he had. And suddenly he sees a Mara of a man. which we would say, well, it's got to be Jesus. And then he hears Jesus's voice in 16 that is talking about, Jesus is saying to Gabriel, make this man who understand not the call zone, but the Mara. And the only Mara we have seen mentioned up to this point in Daniel 8 at least, is nothing more than the end of Daniel 15, which is the appearance of a man. So Daniel's looking for what did I just see with all those horses or he-goats and rams, and suddenly he's shown a Mara or an appearance of what we think to be Jesus. And then Jesus's voice, who I guess is on the water, says, Gabriel, show this man the Mara, which he just saw, which was the appearance of a man. So it's just like a riddle.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
and it's confusing. And I can't 100% say I know what it means, but one of the things that we understand here is Gabriel is involved in this. Okay, let me just kill the share. Gabriel is the one who's called upon to do this. So we find that if the appearance of this man or the Mara of the man is representative of Jesus, Gabriel's involved. Okay, any other thoughts of where Gabriel appears in the Bible?
Where does he appear and what other,
What other fashion is Gabriel, the angel Gabriel?
doesn't he visit Mary?
Yes, he visits Mary. He's there to visit Mary to tell her to what?
That she's going to have Jesus.
Right. So in that instance of Gabriel, he's the one announcing Jesus's birth to Mary. Gabriel is. He's also mentioned in a time in the same chapter, I think it's Luke 1, where Zacharias, John the Baptist's dad, has an angel show up when one time he's in the temple, and the angel shows up, and this angel's Gabriel, is to show up and to tell Zacharias that his wife, who's now an old lady, is going to have a baby. And
Right.
the baby will be named John, and John will usher in the coming of who?
Jesus.
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 It's his cousin.
Right. And so we seem to have the precedent set that Gabriel's associated closely with Jesus
Yeah.
in some form or fashion, as he is in this verse 15 and 16 back in Daniel.
I just Googled this, Darren, and it says that Gabriel is thought to be defender of Israel and close to Israel. I don't know why.
He probably is. And being Jesus is like the hope of Israel, he's the one that gets the honor or so forth of doing this. So we go through now and say Daniel's having a second vision of sorts here. He's not understanding the first part with the he-goats and so forth. He's wanting to understand it. And when he asks for understanding to the first part, the angel shows him a Mara, or the Mara, which is the appearance of a man, which we say was probably Jesus.
Right.
Okay, so now there's a second vision of sorts, which we're trying to understand. So let's read it. Let's read from 16 onward. And I think we were close with our understanding before, where we talked about, we thought maybe the dream last week represented a natural understanding of almost like the devastation of God's natural people. But then there came a shift last week that we thought was mentioned, where it also makes reference to God's devastation of his spiritual people, who would be us Christians. So in other words, the pattern established with the Old Testament people seems to be repeated with the New Testament people the same way. God's very much into patterns. He doesn't lay his patterns down, just willy-nilly and forget. He follows it for a reason, or he does it the first time, usually because it's to be repeated. First is the natural, then is the spiritual. And so we thought last week, especially as we got towards the end, we read the last X number of verses here, but we were sort of saying it's probably that a portion of this morphs from Antiochus to maybe the Antichrist-ish. You know what I'm saying?
Well, just that name sounds like it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So he was the type and pattern that God set to say, more than likely, this would be the same pattern, what happens to my spiritual people. They're overrun by, spiritually they're overrun. But we want to read a portion of that. But before I do, I wanted to read just a little tiny bit of something I thought was really interesting. And the reason we're going into this is because this Mara and the call zone seem to be referenced in the next chapter too, also.
Okay.
And I think 10. So we may not entirely understand what this means, but we will find that they keep talking about it, because Daniel at the end of this chapter still doesn't get it. And so,
I don't get it either.
yeah, me either, Dave. Anyway, this is what it is. Daniel's in 15 is done seeing the vision. So the vision of the call zone is over. And Daniel does not understand the meaning of the call zone, but wants to. So in answer to the vision, Daniel is given the following by ultimately Gabriel. It says, then behold, there still stood before me as the appearance of the man. And that's significant because that represents Jesus. So
Yeah.
Seemingly Jesus, the vision of the man, has great significance, and it is part of the answer to the earlier part of the dream. Maybe it's the solution to it, so to speak. But it says the word given for man in that verse 15 is mighty man or warrior. So that's Jesus, who's, is the mighty man. And it says and the word appearance, which we saw where it says the appearance of a man, or Mara, is used from this point forward to refer to the vision or appearance of this mighty man who seems to be Jesus. Okay. Let me just read the last part of what she wrote. She said, I think it's a lady who wrote this. In essence, from now on through this chapter and chapter 9, Daniel is talking about two different visions. The vision of the 2300 days, or the shall zone or call zone, and the mighty man vision, or Mara. And the Mara, mighty man vision, is given to Daniel to help him understand the 2300 day shall zone, call zone visit. Okay. Now we most likely won't understand, but let me just continue. It says it becomes necessary for understanding to know which word for vision is being used when they are both being used as in one of these following verses. So that being said, referring back to the text, somebody read on through 17 and 18.
As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet.
Now in 17, the angel says, understand, son of man, that vision is for the time of the end. And that word vision is the call zone. So it's the
Oh.
first vision.
Okay.
Now, okay, so I know it gets a little confusing. So keep reading the next like 3 verses, 19, 20, and 21.
Okay. He said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king.
So the angel's explaining what we sort of already know. And he's explaining not the Mara, but he's explaining the Mara, because that's what Jesus told him to explain, but he's explaining the Mara from the point of the call zone, from the beginning part of the call zone. Does that make sense?
No.
No.
Okay, the call zone is the beginning part of the first vision,
Okay.
which is the he-goat,
Yeah.
which gets overrun by the ram, I believe. So he sees that vision until the little horn comes up, the little horn that we say, is that Antiochus, or is that coming out of the 4 winds of heaven? And is that representative of Rome? We're not sure. So at this point, Daniel, when he asks for understanding, is shown by the angel, the Mara, which is seemingly Jesus. And then the angel begins to explain the Mara by describing the beginning portion of the original call zone dream that Daniel had. Does that make sense?
Okay. Mhm.
Okay, so he's explaining the Mara by going back to the beginning of Daniel's call zone dream and starting with it. So he's explaining, hey, the ram, what do you say? The ram is
Yeah, Persia.
Medes and Persians, yeah. And then Greece. So he's saying, okay, you want to know what it means? Well, I'm going to show you the Mara. But in order to understand the Mara, let me go back to the call zone. So it suggests, if this is the original interpretation, the call zone that Daniel read at the beginning of 1 through, verse 14 or 15, the Mara's a portion in the beginning of it. So the call zone's this big thing that the angel told him in, I don't know, 17 or 18, that the visions for the time of the end, okay? Meaning from the first goat, first ram, all the way to the end of, I guess, before Jesus comes a second time. That's what it's referenced. But the Mara is only this part. And that's what he's trying to give him understanding of. But he does it in a confusing way for us readers, because we're not understanding, and there's the same different words that are interpreted the same way. So we're not understanding this.
Yeah.
So
When they write it like, excuse me, not that there were different words, that they were, that's what's confusing. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
yeah,
Wait,
You
what did
have to
you say?
know that what the Hebrews said in order to understand.
and even then, it's still
You
confusing.
don't understand.
Yeah.
Well,
Well-
he didn't understand, so why would we?
True.
Exactly, but I think we're a little closer in understanding the small part of the Mara, but we don't understand the whole call zone thing. The call zone seems to be up until Jesus is coming. So it includes the first temple people, and it seems to include the second spiritual people. But the angel doesn't call it that. He calls that the call zone. And then the Old Testament up to Jesus, he calls the Mara. That
Okay.
seems to suggest what it is.
Hmm.
But
Alright.
Somebody read 22 through 24.
The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represents four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people.
There it is.
So here we're seeing that, and even in verse 23, it says in the latter time of their kingdom, the Grecia's kingdom. Remember, we're trying to figure out if the ram's horn, I'm sorry, the he-goat's
little
horn that was broken off and replaced with the four. We're trying to figure out if the little horn that came out of it came out of the four horns, or whether does it come out as, like it says in 23, it says in the latter part of the kingdom, the Grecian kingdom, when the transgressors are come to a full, suggesting at the end of the Grecian kingdom, another kingdom of fierce countenance and understanding and dark sentences stands up, suggesting what nation probably is that? Rome?
I
Back
mean,
then,
It's either Antiochus or it's Rome who comes up at the end of the Grecian. Just like, in other words, this is the legs of iron that he seems to be suggesting are ushered in. We're just seeing a different picture. And the angels are keeping this extremely blurry
yeah.
because it's hard to follow, really hard to
but
follow.
if this is the end days, doesn't that sound like the Antichrist,
Yes,
right?
it does.
So-
It does.
It sounds exactly like what the Antichrist is going to do and how he'll succeed. So I don't understand why we're comparing it to Rome.
Well, because Rome comes up before, remember the feet of Rome that are part human and
Okay.
part, and so a stone without hands comes and breaks it. The same way at the end of the spiritual age, Jesus comes and breaks what man has done to his kingdom, which is a Christianity. Let's break. We're about out of time. We'll be right back.
Already?
Yeah.